Holy crap, ladies and gentlemen. It's Tuesday, it's January 25th. This is the Day 9 Daily, where we learn to be a better gamer. I couldn't tell you what number it is. It looks like it's the 247th one. Excuse me. It's a little bit of a hectic Tuesday, where everything seems to be, combusting, I guess is the best word for it. One of those things where, I'm trying to think of the best way to describe the way that today is felt, which is like impossible. You know, like you go to the, go to the mail store to like mail a package, and you brought the package but not the mailing address, and you're like, like one of those. Even when I went to go to Chipotle, I messed up my order online. Normally I get a burrito bowl with no rice, but instead I ordered a burrito and just said no tortilla, right? I clicked burrito and I ordered all the stuff and then just put no rice, no tortilla. And they were so confused, they just didn't make me anything when I showed up at the Chipotle. They said, you asked for burrito with no tortilla. And I was like, that doesn't make a lot of sense. It's one of those, like, I'd like to have a burrito, but hold the burrito. I just don't want any of that. So I just recently got some food. It was a little bit rough. It was a little bit luff. That's what my mouth wanted to say, so I'll go ahead and acquiesce. In exciting news, if you go to the infamous Facebook page known as facebook.com/HyperXCommunity, you can submit this week's fancy submission theme, which is to submit your best StarCraft 2 unit impersonation through an image, video, song, audio clip, and all that stuff. And the winner receives all sorts of good prizes. Oh, yes, and in fact, this is going to be going on for the next several weeks. Of course, go to facebook.com/HyperXCommunity. And the winners get a chance to go hang out with me and In Control at the Penny Arcade Expo. So, last week's winner was an amazing little piece of fan art. This week's winner, yes, that is of course correct. The I Apologize Idra In Control fan art. That is just too good. That is too good. Big congratulations to Jace Wallace, of course. If you win, you get all the fancy things I'm highlighting. HyperX Genesis Memory Pack, free PC game of his choice, and qualifying for the Grand Finals to hang out with me. And of course, the Week 3 stuff will be extended. A lot of people missed out on last week's announcement again. Facebook.com/HyperXCommunity. Submit your favorite unit impersonation through audio, video, or image. You even saw my immortal in the Day 9 Daily number 241. Yes, definitely go ahead and check that one out. So yesterday's was a good daily. Yesterday's went, I think, smoothly. That Fun Day Monday. And for any of you who are new to Newbie Tuesday, which is today, there's a lot of things that the best of the ultra crazy Gosus do. That is, I guess I would call opaque, right? That it's hard to really wrap your head around. One of the greatest examples was a Korean player in the original Starcraft named Best. And he came onto the scene late, like around 2007, 2008 is when Best was really starting to appear, and then like through 2009, 2010. So when he became important, when he became big, he had been around for StarCraft had been around for 10 years, right? 10 years. You would imagine in that time that people had pretty much mastered their fundamentals. They were good at controlling their units, they were good at building a lot of units, they were good at watching the minimap and this sort of thing. But Best was very weird in that his strategies were rarely brilliant. His strategies were often almost seemingly bad because they were so ordinary and so seen. But for some crazy reason, he would always have twice as many units as everybody. No one really knew how, but he just always had 50 million times as many units. He had the most amazing macro and economy management that anyone had ever seen. And the reason I bring up this example is that not only is that hard to figure out from the get-go. When I look at that, I just go, that's a lot of shit. And I can identify that a lot of shit is flowing from his base. But I don't know how. I don't know why. It's just so much stuff. So that's one of the first big things to note. It's hard to see how that happened. And also, when you go and try it, it's also kind of hard to figure that out yourself. And that's what Newbie Tuesday tries to do, is that there's a lot of different strategies and techniques that you will see the best of the best do seemingly effortlessly, but when you try to go do it at home, it feels off and it feels ugly. So today's particular topic of choice is a recent style that has been increasingly growing in popularity from Jinro against MC. In the Golem TV Star League round of 8, I believe it was, Jinro was in a group. Was it round of 8? It's not important. But anyways, there was a group stage where Jinro was against MC. And MC 4-0'd Jinro last GSL. It was ugly, right? It did not look very pretty. And then, in these new group stages in the GSL, Jinro got paired against MC, and in the first game, was making a ton of tanks. Sure, he made some Marines out of a reactor barracks, to get some extra Marines into bunkers and all that good sort of stuff, but just kept making tanks. And MC responded by making lots and lots and lots and lots of Immortals and Phoenixes. Phoenixes can obviously lift the tanks up, disabling them. And Jinro just kept making tanks. He even included some Thors and some Hellions into that mix, some Blue Flame Hellions, mind you. And MC just, got crushed. And then in the next game, Jinro did this huge, crazy, Thor, handful of Marines, but basically Thor, Marine, Banshee, Viking, this very, very, again, mech-heavy play, and was using the, the 250mm cannon from the Thor. You saw me trying to use my hands to remember what was up. Doing all that good jazz against the Immortals. And the 250mm cannon seemed to disable the Immortals. And this immediately made all the Terran players excited because predominantly Terran vs. Protoss is a lot of Marines and Marauders and Medevacs and Vikings and more Marines, Marauders, and Medevacs and Vikings. Maybe you put in a Ghost there. Probably not. Chances are not. So what I challenge people to do for this week, and again, why it's important to do this whole story leading up, is the fact that in this, I suggested go try to do this mech style of play, because I want to try to highlight some key issues that happen when players see inspiring styles and then try to do them themselves. Whether it just be with the feel of it or with just actually being able to copy it properly. So there's a number of games that we have here. There was a somewhat short one that I wanted to look at. I believe this is the one. I'm pretty sure that's right, unless there's another 13-minute one. I kind of downloaded a lot. One of the interesting problems that we'll look at later is a surprising number of people didn't actually end up doing that build. I'm just going to briefly open my computer just to make sure I have enough disk space for this recording. Yes, I do. I have a whole 8 gigabytes. Yippee, hooray. So we're seeing an absolutely, completely unpronounceable Protoss name in the bottom right. Xantisuide. He will be known as Blue Protoss from here on out. And Crayon Box, God bless you for the easy name. Let's look at one of the early issues that can happen with trying to just generally copy the style of play. So the second game between Jinro and MC was on Scrap Station. And on this map, Jinro did a very Thor-heavy style of play. So big Thor-heavy style of play. We're seeing Crayon Box, what I would say, do something that I think is quite smart when trying to attempt the strategy. He knows that he wants to get a factory out because he's doing mech play. So he's going to do a little rearrangement. He's going to build his refinery and then build his barracks. For any of you who didn't know, if you go refinery first, barracks second, you can start a factory right when your barracks finishes. So as I speed this game up to *8 and then rewind it, we can see right now as the barracks finishes, look at that, just over enough money to be able to begin building that factory. That's great. I'm not a big Crayon Box watcher. I don't download tons of Crayon Box's games. But considering the general theme of Terran players, most Terrans are going to be going for the barracks first and then the gas second because they get the orbital command a little faster and they can make a Marine a little faster. Pretty typical, usual, ordinary, good jazz. And this is always something that excites me, is when a player does anything that contributes to the overall goal. And you hear me talk about goal and plan a lot. And a lot of newer players often try to say, well, how do I know if it's a good goal or a good plan? It's most important that it is a goal or a plan. So you can always ask questions in the context of, does this help my plan? So for instance, going for gas first, very, very simple thing to do, but it's going to allow him to get his factory a little bit earlier. And as we see, it delays our orbital command. That's very typical when we do this gas first style of play, but no big deal. Looks like we do see Crayon Box pulling back, building another geyser. Again, this is the sort of thing that on paper we would say that this geyser here contributes to our thought. We want to be going for a big mech play. We just want to be a little bit careful that we don't supply block ourselves, say that we don't get enough money. We'll end up examining that in just a moment, but we see that our factory is down. Here comes the armory. Right now, obviously to allow some Thors to pop out. Yep, that's right. Wouldn't be the day 9 daily if that bad boy weren't turned off at the start. Getting the add-on. Getting stim for our Marines. Looks like we're pumping up to do a very strong Marine Thor push. And this is one thing that always makes me a little bit leery, is when you get to a point like this, there's always key moments in whatever build you're doing. This is true for every race, in every style, no matter what. He said with his thing, looking a little bit... Oh yeah, that's Gamer, sorry. I was looking around because I could see Gamer messaging me somewhere, and then when I opened it, it says, no sound. Sorry, Gamer. So here's something that is true for every race, in every matchup, with every build order. There's always a key time when something happens, or something finishes, where you want to immediately do something else. Very obvious example. Your queen finishes, so you immediately want to spawn larvae with it. You don't want to have your queen finish and then sit there, and then add the larva, right? In an even more dumb example, when your probe finishes, you want that probe to go mine immediately. Very clear, obvious, simple, intuitive stuff. But I want all of you, with all of your builds, and especially, because this is Newbie Tuesday, those of you who consider yourself newbies, you know, anyone who's basically not Master Division, and even some of you Master Division people too, right? You want to say something like, my armory just finished. And when my armory finishes, can I afford a Thor? Can I build a Thor? And if the answer is no, you should say something like, well, am I spending money poorly? Should I have, not built this bunker? Should I have not gotten this stim? Did I just build this armory a little too early? Because anytime a key structure finishes and the obvious follow-up cannot happen, and in this context, when the armory finishes, the building of the Thor seems to have not happened. Whenever that occurs, you should say to yourself, how do I prevent that from happening next time? Next time. Always the emphasis on next time. So for Crayon Box, it's sometimes tempting to go, oh, well, right now I have a lot of gas. Maybe I could get a Raven out. Maybe I could do something with a Raven because I have a lot of gas. That's thinking too much about this game and not about next time. Not having the Thor get built, look at how long that this happens, where the Thor is just not getting built, right? We're at 550. We're going to see it's actually a pretty extraordinarily long time. All right, yeah, it looks like it's about 30 seconds, right? So our armory is going to be finishing soon. Let's go ahead and select our factory. And then let's mouse over this so we see exactly when it finishes. Come on, come on, come on, come on, come on, come on, come on. All right, it finishes at 5 minutes and 35 seconds. And then as we look at our factory, 5 minutes 35. All right, we've just hit 20 seconds of time. We're about to hit 30 seconds of time. We just hit that. All right, cool, there's the Thor going down. I would call that a 30-second bump. If you have a 30-second bump in your play, don't analyze the strategy of your play. Don't do it. So, in other words, if you were Crayon Box in this circumstance, it's conceivable, thinking of this game, to say, I could probably get a Raven out. That's wrong to think that. That's wrong. The correct thing to say is, damn, my Thor built way later than it should have. So next time I need to do something so my money is a lot lower. And then, once you start your Thor, 30 seconds earlier, you might realize you're broke. You can't even build a Raven at all. The fewer bumps you have, the more you realize, oh, all these things I thought I could do before were issues caused by bumps in timing, bumps in macro, me forgetting to build stuff, that sort of thing. You never want to delude yourself into thinking you can do things when you really can't. Bumpiness is probably the biggest thing. Now, I want to relate what's happening right now to the Jinro vs. MC series. What are we seeing Crayon Box do? He is dashing towards, well, first he's dashing in general. I must concede to that point. But we're seeing him sprint to the most memorable moment in that Jinro vs. MC game. Look at this. Thors, Marines with stim upgrade, the 250mm cannon. If you watch the second game of Jinro vs. MC, if you watch that, the exciting part was the very, very last 10% of the game when Jinro came out with Thors, with the cannons and blasted away all these immortals. It's when he had a ton of Vikings killing off the carriers and all the cool fancy micro. That part is what sticks out in almost everybody's mind because everybody is pretty much uncontrollably battle-minded, right? But the problem is that battle happened just at the very end. And what we're seeing Crayon Box do, which is a common misperception, which is to run as fast as possible to the exciting moment. He's trying to get the Thors immediately and the Marines immediately. He's neglecting to take a base here. He's neglecting to set up a third base for himself. He's neglecting to think about the game in long term, like how do I deal with a Protoss who, say, doesn't expand. So here comes Crayon Box moving out with his force. And this can feel like a very, very powerful little force right now. It's actually pretty sturdy. Looks like we're getting the +1 vehicle plating. So let's go ahead and watch what ends up happening to Crayon Box. This is a pretty typical push. Look. Thors with support. Thors with Marines. There's the scan. Oh man, this guy's been making a ton of immortals. And as we see, here's the stim up. Marines can be a little more bold in the front because there's absolutely no way that any sort of force field can really get into the way. And we see that suddenly this was kind of really easy to be able to hold off, right? This is not going well at all for Crayon Box. In fact, I mean, we clearly see the Protoss player at a significant advantage. So we're going to be talking about classic mistakes in just a minute. We're seeing all the little SCVs try to repair their buddy Thor. And we see Protoss have a nice little force. Now, if we just go to the resource station, we see Protoss is ahead. If we go to the unit counting station, I mean, look at this. 3 Thors and a Marine versus huge freaking army from Protoss. The other big classic mistake that someone will do is they will, again, be in this losing situation where they got battered, they don't really have many units back home, and they'll say, well, what do I do now? And they try to think of how to save themselves and all that good stuff and try to analyze and continue to probe and prod at their build order, when really the answer is you're dead. Just, you know, you don't have to do the Idra style instantly GG, but there should always be a point in the game where you say, whoa, you know what, I think I really lost the advantage just now. So for some of you, actually, I know that this is a big problem, especially at the lower levels where, you know, losses can feel very frustrating. A great way to stave that off and also to make yourself feel a little bit happier, right, and not get so frustrated, is in a game, you always try to look for the point where you feel like you really fell behind. So what I would do is I would be Crayon Box and I'd be like, ugh, you know, around 10 minutes and 30 seconds when that attack happened. After that, I felt really behind. And in your head, you say, yeah, you know what, I think I've lost. I think I'm dead. But let me just keep playing it out. And then you play it out. You can practice things like your mouse accuracy. You can practice things like constant SCV production and looking at the top right corner. And in your head, you basically go, yeah, you know what, I think I'm already dead. And then when you rewatch the game or replan your build order, you can think of it as, well, how do I not get screwed at 10 minutes and 30 seconds? So, I mean, our Terran hero might say, well, yeah, maybe I need 3 Thors to push. Or maybe I need no Thors and I need to be expanding. Maybe I shouldn't even be doing this style at all. And we're seeing Crayon Box sort of back up and get a lot of Marines, which, again, kind of a typical thing to happen when you're on one base, is you just say, wow, I absolutely have no gas. I guess I'm going to go back and make some Marine Marauders. Now we're sort of steering clear from Mech. And it's very easy to ask yourself something like, well, after an early push, I like to transition into a big Marine Marauder style. Maybe even get some sort of tech unit from this starport. But again, what we're going to see is that our Terran buddy Crayon Box moves down, and this force from this blue Protoss with a hard-to-pronounce name is just so huge that it crushes this small force of Immortals. The Speed Zealot's doing a lot of damage. I mean, this is very, very clearly in the advantage of the Protoss player. So, just to re-emphasize that note of when you lost, we already said that the game swung away from Terran at the 10 minute and 30 second mark, so he should do his best to kind of avoid that in the near future. If he didn't avoid that, the wrong way to think is to say something like, how do you stop speed zealots when you have a bunch of Thors? Because let's say the tragic thing happened where Crayon Box was convinced he was still in the lead, right? He was convinced he was doing great. When obviously from the food counts we can see he's not. The zealots start to charge up and we're seeing these Thors aren't really doing that much damage against him. Oh man. And then they seem to just get in the way and they're tearing up the SCVs as well. Oh my gosh. And then someone creates the unbelievably painful original post in the forum. How do you stop this many zealots when you're going mech play? That is not a valid question. The answer is you have no data from this game. It's not that you have one piece of data because the zealots tore up. You have 0 pieces of data. Because remember, 10 minutes and 30 seconds, we already lost that game. So this game is fairly simple. It highlights a couple of the things that I wanted to explore. One was, linking up our strategy with our overall plan. Like, hey, we did our gas first. Great, that helps us get the Thors. Ooh, we got our second gas. Was that too early or too late? Well, second gas will help me get my mech play going. So, right, there's another one. The second thing I wanted to point out, whenever you see a build that excites you, make sure you're thinking more about the order that the buildings and, most importantly, the expansions go down. Don't think and get excited about the units. That is the big issue that happens most of the time. People get excited about the units. Oh my gosh, you want mass Banshee Viking? So what do? They make 1-star port with Banshees, and then 1-star port making Vikings, and then they never expand, and they lose only because they don't have enough stuff, right? So again, getting excited about the cool-looking part of the game and trying to copy that. And then, of course, the last thing that we're hopefully going to see a lot of times is the moment when the game was basically done and where no more real learning or studying should occur for our build order. So, for instance, Crayon Box, who did a push that may have been effective in other circumstances, or may not have, that was done at the 10 minutes and 30-second point. So there was one of these. It was a Metalopolis game. Was this it? Yeah, this was great. Okay, cool. Now, as this game begins, we have Ryuchas, who is in the north corner as the ghostly pink. We have Necro. I'm not going to say that. That didn't occur to me when I was watching the game initially. Whatever. His name will be Orange. All right. So one thing that was kind of funny to me when watching a lot of games, right? A lot of games, is that most people did not do a mech-focused play. And this didn't really surprise me, but it's still so frequent that it's important to note. So when I said mech-focused play, I was thinking of something that focused largely around the factory units, the Hellions, the tanks, the Thors. Those are the big 3. Sure, you can get some Vikings and Banshees in there, that's fine, or some Ravens even. Even if you pepper in a couple of Marines or Marauders from 1 or 2 barracks, it's great, that's fine. But a lot of people would just start making tanks from 1 factory and then go 8 barracks on 3 bases. 1 factory into 8 barracks. So sure, they would have like 15 tanks, but they would have a lot of Marines and Marauders. And that is not something that really helps focus on this sort of mech play. So that is another symptom of thinking of the units instead of the buildings. That is a big thing to note. So, for instance, in this game, as we're going to see our Terran hero build 2 factories. And I really want you to think about the fact that it's 2 factories. Is 1 going for a tech lab? Is 1 going for a reactor? When I watch a lot of Jinro's mech games, and even in the games he's gone mech against me, he really likes 3 factories with tech lab, 1 factory with a reactor. So we can make some Hellions, but mainly tanks. Cool. Numbers. Those numbers are important. It's the buildings that make the units. Don't think about the units, because then you'll get in silly situations where you think, wow, Immortals are cool units. And you'll go 3 Robo with 1 Gateway. And then you'll having a lot of Immortals. And you won't have any supporting Gateway units, and the Immortals will end up dying very, very easily. So those numbers are quite key. So let's go ahead and look at some numbers in this game of this mech-related play. All right. Let's go ahead and speed things up. Intentionally, with some of the games that we're going to look at today, I didn't actually watch them all the way through, because there's questions I wanted to ask without having it be colored by what I was going to be able to see later on. Marines from 1 barracks with no add-on, and 1 factory being constructed right now. We see no second gas at this point in time. Alright, and here comes maybe some sort of add-on. I'm not actually that stressed out about the fact that this timing, it was a little bit behind. I mostly want to just think about how this ends up feeling for our Terran buddy Ryu. So again, on the execution half, could be executed a little bit better. Things, for instance, like this, the siege mode coming down, but we're getting some Hellions first. This is one of those things that for an experienced player, a lot of experienced players will cringe. But a lot of lower-level players won't. They'll just sort of say to themselves, well, I mean, I'm getting siege tanks anyways. I have the money to get siege mode, so I'll get siege mode. But it's kind of weird when you frame things in the context of, if you don't get siege mode right now and get it later, you can actually build another factory right now. For any of you who did not know, this upgrade costs 100. Which means that if you just have 50 more minerals, you can easily get another factory. I'm just going to back this up a little bit so that way we can see the moment exactly when this went down. Dum-da-dum-bum. Here's the siege mode. There it is, 100, sitting underneath my overlay. So we're going to see some Hellions pop out in a moment. But yeah, it's very common to say something like, well, yeah, look, I have the gas to get it, so I'll get it. But we could have built another factory here. We could have built another barracks. So for any of you who are in that bronze to platinum range, a huge thing I want you to think about is what buildings you're throwing down, and more importantly, the order. The order is really key. If you go siege mode and then factory, you won't have as many units. And if you go factory and then siege mode, you'll have more units. And almost always, you're going to have siege mode at a good time anyways. The only reason you'd really want to rush for siege mode is, for instance, if you were terrified that you were on the verge of death. But I specifically chose this game because we do see Ryu doing something that looks pretty reasonable, right? He's getting some Hellions and Marines early on. He's getting a Banshee. And he has 2 Hellions out, siege mode's done, and he has no tanks built. That's kind of an obvious example of the, yeah, when I'm going mech, I'm going to eventually want the tanks. But if I have 0 tanks right now, I obviously don't need the siege mode. Again, this is an exaggerated example, but a lot of times people will have 5 Marines, 1 tank, and will be 100% unbreakable. Totally safe. But they'll feel this urge to just get the siege mode fast. Because it's there. I could get it right now. But I want you to just think a little bit harder anytime you're trying to arrange your build order so you know, do I really want to be building that right now? There's the factory going down. Cool. Let's go ahead and see some tanks getting produced. A big theme I want to note. Oh yeah, by the way, notice these numbers. Factory, 1 with Tech Lab, another factory with a reactor. Good. We might even do something like plan on getting 2 factories with reactor, one with a Tech Lab. We'd have a whole lot of Hellions in that play. That's fine. But we don't want to think of it as, oh yeah, Hellions and tanks, and just wing it. We want to think about the structures making them, because this will honestly help define the compositions. The most common way people get good-looking compositions is because they have some buildings dedicated to this kind of unit and other buildings dedicated to that kind of unit. You ever watch Terran vs. Protosses where you see like 2 barracks with reactor and 5 barracks with Tech Lab, and there's a lot of Marines and Marauders coming out? That's a very good composition. It ends up being a little more than half Marauders and a little less than half Marines. That's a good mix in a lot of circumstances. And it's not because the player was going, oh, what's my army at? Okay, maybe I need some more Marines. Oh, no, maybe now I need some more Marauders. He's just mindlessly churning out of these structures. The structures help define that. For Protoss, you can even do something like, I have 5 Warp Gates. I'm going to go Stalker, 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 Zealot. Stalker, 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 Zealot. Yeah, that was 5. Right, and then, hey, that leads you to a very specific looking mix. So, and again, you can follow it totally mindlessly. It's a lot better than just sort of going, I guess Stalkers, SSSSSSS. I guess Zealots, ZZZZZZZ. So a big theme I also wanted to focus on a little bit with Mech is how funky the mobility feels. Tanks are immobile units, literally. They cannot move because they are sieged. And even when unsieged, they are slow. Hellions are very fast and can ninja their way around the map. Good amount of Mariners there. Yep, we see another factory coming down. So there's a pretty good, you know, just general technique, which is to leave these siege tanks back a little bit. But you also want to make sure you're pretty active with these Hellions, which would be poking around the outskirts here, just sort of dancing, trying to find out if there's any hole. Because notice that this whole army was able to walk its way over here. Orange was able to come here, and if we just move back a couple of seconds, and we go to the, whoopsie daisies, the Ryu cam, if we look at him, he had absolutely no idea that this push was coming. You know, he didn't even know what an expansion is going on right now. You want to be a little more active with these guys. Always have your units ideally doing something. And having tanks at home and just saying, I will defend with these, that's a perfectly reasonable thing to say. So we're seeing these siege tanks begin to blast their way at that Immortal. Be careful with pulling your Hellions back too far. A lot of times you kind of want the Hellions at the front, taking a lot of damage. So we're seeing a nice, solid little push by Protoss. Let's see how Terran ends up defending. It looks like doing some damage to the Stalkers. Tanks actually have a pretty darn fast fire rate, so they actually are able to take things down pretty well. And I will say that this is surprising, I think, to a lot of people to see that Terran was able to hold that. Let's actually come back a bit. And this is one of the reasons why it's good to experiment with other styles, because sometimes your look just betrays what's actually true. Look at this. Okay, I'm going to read this army aloud. We have 14 Stalkers, 4 Zealots, 3 Sentries, and an Immortal. Against 3 tanks, some Marines, and some Hellions. Not many at all. 6 Marines, 6 Hellions. We even got a bunker. And look at this. Like, crushed and overwhelmingly bigger army. I actually want to go to the Units Lost tab to see if this ends up being true, that Orange ended up losing more money's worth of units. I guess it was a little bit marginally so, but yeah, you can kind of see that this is very, very hard to break. You can hold positions pretty darn easily, and I think Ryu is starting to realize to himself, wow, yeah, you know what? I kind of need some more tanks. At the same time, he's doing a very smart thing. He's doing some Banshee Harass. Now, this is smart for a number of reasons. First of all, Banshee Harass just generally does a good amount of damage. But why does this make sense with our mech build? We are immobile. We are immobile. We universally want to be able to put pressure back on our opponent no matter what. Even though Ryu is just going to have to sit back and defend this for a little while, even though the Immortals are extremely hard to kill with tanks. That is exactly what you want to be doing as Ryu. You don't have to be really aggressive and do stuff with Banshees. You can do other things as well. So actually, as we speed through this early phase right now, just sort of zipping our way along as we see a lot of damage being dealt. We don't have any blue flame yet. Kind of would like to see that. So now that we're sort of here and we're seeing Terran returtle up again, where are they? Excuse me, there we go. Now, I'm going to actually ask the question to the audience. Why would Banshees, with this play, not be a good idea? You already heard me say, you know what, Banshees, pretty good. We can put pressure back on our opponent. Our tanks are super immobile. We can't really do much with them at the early stages. Why would that be pretty good? So we're going to go ahead and see what people's thoughts are on that one. People seem to just state the very, very obvious one, which is that it's too expensive for the gas, right? It's a lot of gas. And some other people are saying things that I like quite a bit. Actually, Soul Wager just types Hellions in all caps. I want you to rewatch that Jinro vs. MC game on Lost Temple. Jinro did harassment, but he did it with Blue Flame Hellion drops. A medevac is just 100 gas once. It's not like, you know, the 100 gas for each Banshee. And then the Hellions are just money, and we can use all our gas on those tanks that are really good. A lot of people are saying that the Banshees don't do enough damage. I actually think that the Banshees are pretty good as a unit. I mean, honestly, they are great at offending, defending, the fact that they have pretty decent range and can hide behind things. The one issue, though, is that they don't really stack. 6 tanks is way better than 3 tanks. Like, 6 tanks is like 50 times better than 3 tanks. Tanks get much more effective when they get in larger numbers. Banshees really don't. So we kind of want to be having a lot of tanks focused instead of these Banshees. Looks like Ryu is just sort of winging it at this point in time. We're going to be looking at a long game in just a moment, because one thing that I'm sure many of you mechers have found is that it feels like you're just not doing that much. you have virtually no map control. If we actually just go to the Ryu cam, it's just these Banshees that are out on the screen right now. That is about it. And that is actually okay. And we're seeing, again, a very common thing, which is, oh, my money's high. I guess I'll make more barracks. We did start getting gas a little bit late here. So anytime your money's high, try not to think about the what can I do now to save this. Think about the next time. Next time, in the next game, what can I do to avoid this situation? In this game, yeah, sure, it seems obvious to be able to make some barracks, but in next game, how can I get more gas? How can I spend that minerals effectively? Honestly, expanding is a very good way to expend minerals with this style. Just you know, creeping your tanks up here with a lot of Marines. A lot of players prefer one reactor barracks so they can get plenty and plenty and plenty of their minerals spent. So we're going to see the scan. Ryu's advancing forward. Tanks are an immobile unit. The Hellions are what give them mobility. You really do not want too many tanks. If you're just an all-tank push, you're going to be very, very weak. Honestly, these Hellions sitting at the front, just taking the damage, is fantastic. And obviously cleaning up those Zealots. Got to be a little careful. Ryu could have actually just crushed that. That was actually not even going to be close with that force, but it can be very intimidating whenever you're doing a new style. You will feel as though you can't move out. Just try to move out a little bit more. I'm going to go ahead and speed this up a little bit. I think one of the big reasons why our Terran player is doing so well is that he's just been harassing with Banshees relentlessly. So Orange can't really do much of anything. There's the drop that was an attempt to do damage, but I think it's pretty clear that Ryu is just overwhelmingly ahead. By the way, I think this is kind of cute to build things there. Very vulnerable, though. They'll get picked off by Stalkers. But I still like it, and I'm sticking to it. There's the Observer going down right now. There's the Siege up and the Cleanup. I mean, just look at how easy that is. Wow, the tanks didn't even die, really. Tanks are very, 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 very powerful. As long as they have a good number of Hellions, just sort of accept some damage. So, the big thing that I would want to note during that game is that we saw that the Terran player Ryu almost died. He actually almost died in that game, right at the start. There were a few bumps in his build. For instance, he was getting siege mode without any tanks. He was getting some Hellions and Marines early on, and then just kind of expanding. Stuff was kind of just getting gotten, right? Banshees were kind of going out. You always want to be thinking of more things to peel away from your build, not more things to add to it, because then people are like, well, what about a Raven or a Ghost with EMP? Ooh, a Ghost with EMP would be so cool because you can EMP all the Immortals, and then if he goes Phoenixes, maybe I should get some Thors too, and then you convince yourself that you should have one of every unit. Every unit in StarCraft 2 is really, really, really good, so it always feels reasonable to argue for it. But you want to be peeling stuff away. Peeling, how do I do less? How do I get less stuff? Can I get away with fewer Marines, with less unit-producing structures, with not making any Banshees at all? Can I actually just go tanks and Hellions and only make 4 Marines at the start before I expand? Do less, do less, do less. So, to sort of relate that back to the... to what we were talking about in Game 1. You really want to be as aware as possible of when the buildings go down and what buildings go down when you're trying to steal from somebody. Because in this game, we saw a lot of tanks and Hellions, Marines kind of just appear at the start of the game, but there was a disorganization to them. There was the factory that went down that made some Hellions, then made some tanks, and then made some Hellions, and then another factory that went down that got the reactor, and then I guess it made some Hellions, but then it stopped. Just get a fixed number of structures and begin producing out of exactly those mixes. So there was a much longer game that was here. There it is. It was by November and Seabell. There we go. There we go. There we go. So here's Seabell going down right now. Good. Let's go ahead and advance it forward. We see Seabell is the red in the top left. We have November as our blue Terran buddy. I want to talk a little bit more about mobility with this style of mech play because it just feels very, very weird. This is a long game that I saw just the start of, and I'm only going to be talking about mobility with this. with mobility. So I just want to review up to this point what we've learned. We want to do this mech style that Jinro did. The most important thing that we talked about in the first 2 games is to make sure that we're stealing it correctly, that we're doing the exact sorts of things in the right order. Because I pointed out in the first game that our Terran player just went straight for the Thor and Marine push, but he didn't really have any economy, so it was kind of weak, and Protoss was able to hold it. In the second game, our Terran player kind of made some tanks, kind of made some Hellions, kind of made some Marines, then kind of expanded. Think a little bit more about the order, and then let that order be your autopilot. Now is when I get the factory that builds, gets the tech lab. So at that point, I'm only going to be making tanks, and then just sort of look at it that way. And also, we talked a little bit more about bumps, identifying some bumps. Oh, our armory just finished, but we don't have enough money to build a Thor. That's a bump. So we want to be examining that quite a lot. There's the barracks finishing right now. Now, in this game, we want to be focusing a little bit more on the idea of mobility. How does Mech feel? What does it let us do? What does it not let us do? In stark contrast to Marine Marauder. There's our Marine blasting away the probe. A couple of Marines being made at the start. That's fine. Again, early second refinery. Why would this make intuitive sense to us? Well, if we're going for a big mech-style play, then we really should have a lot of gas early on. That's fine. Is it going to be too much gas? Is it going to be too little? I don't know, but at least I have an argument for it. And you want to begin with something that sounds logical, so that way you can test it and play with it. Because you might say something like, yeah, I know with mech you want a lot of gas in general, but as it turns out, you just kind of can't really spend it that fast because you're getting Hellions early on. Now here's another little bump. We're going to see a factory go down, but let's look at this money from November. He already has enough to build another factory. He has enough. He still has enough. He still has enough. He still has enough money. He still has plenty of money to build that factory. There is still plenty of money to build that factory. The factory just finished. Still has money. And there the factory is going down. This factory could have been started quite a bit earlier. This could have been started way a bit earlier. Tech lab for the dude going down. Mariners blocking DOS ramp. Gonna go ahead and speed things up a little bit. And here's the siege tank coming out. Notice no siege mode was going out immediately. Just wanted to get the siege tank up first and begin churning those out as much as possible. Got to be a little careful. We're looking a little bit shy of gas. I think we're going to be okay for one more factory, for one more tank. But we won't really be able to produce too much out of this here factory. Well, it looks like it's going to be done, so maybe we can begin making a Hellion or something out of it. It looks like what our Terran player decided to do was to build a command center. So notice this factory, the factory that could have been started earlier, actually has not even really been able to do much of anything. This factory literally has just sort of existed without any purpose. What does that mean? We could have simply not gotten this factory and then gotten our command center a little bit earlier. So that's a little bit more of the build order thing. Let's begin to talk about mobility. Now we're starting to see it get used. On Shakura's plateau, we're starting to see that this is a long distance to go. I mean, our tanks have to siege and unsiege and advance forward. Protoss is taking his bases. We really need to think about how we can deal with this lack of mobility. We're going to start to see mobility come into play. We see an armory going down right now. Oh, cool, blue flame going down with the armory. I would hope some upgrades would go down. Because a big interesting fact about doing a mech-style play is that you can be very passive and just slowly take expansions, and that's okay. Right? You can just slowly take expansions, do something ultra late game focused. I'm talking like one factory, expand. Second factory, armory, get upgrades, expand again. Turtle. Like turtle hard. Focus on winning in the very late game. Because as we've seen, if you get like 16 tanks, you almost can't be broken. Rewatch Jinro vs. MC's game on Lost Temple. In that game, Jinro does a lot of just sitting, hanging out, waiting. He'll poke and prod and try to do damage, but not with a bunch of tanks. He's not going to take 6 tanks early and do an attack. That's way too vulnerable. He's going to be getting those Hellions early on. So I would love to see some sort of upgrade come up pretty soon. Looks like we're doing a little bit of Hellion, a little bit of tank. Notice that we could have just not gotten this tech lab, and we just could have been making Hellions from it just dry straight up. Here's the other expansion going down by Seabell. It doesn't look like Seabell has any clue of what's coming up. He may have poked at the front and gotten a good sense. We do see some double Void Ray coming out. A pretty common transition nowadays for Protoss against Terran, just to suddenly get some of those bad boys a churning. So let's actually speed it up and see what ends up happening in the later stages of the game. This is about as much as I have seen. So immediately, this is another thing that we notice with this new style that we're trying out, that I hope is something that a lot of you experience when you tried to mess with this style, which is that you have a lot of money left over. A lot of people prefer to just get 2 factories with reactors and just blare out as many of those Hellions as possible. Other people like to expand a lot. Just make sure that if you do expand, it's safe in some way. November, I really think, should just do something like siege up here. Maybe even get some siege tanks on this high and low ground and just play defensively with expanding. For that reason, I think that this is a better choice for expansion as opposed to this. This feels a little bit wide. Look at the distance here to here. This is a pretty gigantic space. It's a lot easier to defend this space. Notice how much shorter that is. If we were going Marine Marauder, I think this would be a great place to expand. It's farther away from the opponent because we have a mobile army. We can bounce back to it very, very easily. That seems perfect. But if we have a slow-ass mech army, I really don't quite like that so much. Again, talking about mobility, that's the big thing here. So November is moving out with an army that might feel very intimidating, but is actually a little bit risky. It's a little bit risky. You have to be extremely careful when you're pushing out with this sort of army, because of the fact that in relatively small, isolated numbers, your army doesn't function well. Notice how quickly those Hellions disappeared, and now how quickly these tanks are going to disappear. And the fact that these guys were way far behind actually is not as relevant as you think. Obviously, if we had all of these forces together, that would have been much better. Obviously, that would be the case. But I want to focus on the resource station for a moment. I want you to see why it's dangerous to run your tanks this far up. Here is again the idea of being immobile. A lot of people are noting in the chat right now, wow, the siege tanks are sieging really close to this high ground. They're sieging really close to the ramp. That's the problem, is that you kind of need to lead with the Hellions, do some poking, and you need to start sieging the tanks around here. And then you might need to advance to like here, then maybe advance to somewhere like here, and then maybe advance to like there. Right? You need to inch your way forward. It's a slow way to play. We were at 110 versus 107, but we're seeing, look at the food just plummet for Terran. Lost a lot more food than the Protoss player. And then here are some more units, sacrificial style, will end up going out. And you know what is even worse about this? Look at Protoss's money. If Protoss had spent that could have been 20 more zealots. That could have been 40 more food that Protoss would have had. 40 more food. That is so much more food, right? That is a ton more food. So with these mech styles, you want to go ahead and embrace your immobility a little bit more. So we do see these Thors coming out. Thors allow you to be a little bit more mobile, but again, Thors are super slow. Planetary Fortress going down, that is the one benefit of attacking and expanding. Even if the attack fails miserably, you're still fine. You're still fine. So this game is going to actually go out into the late game. We're seeing some barracks get built by November, which is a kind of a common thing that you see players do when they're feeling a little bit under pressure and a little high on minerals. They start to sort of retract back into either any way that I can spend my money now, or just some sort of safety net sort of feeling. Oh, but good thing those barracks got killed off, so we can go all factories. Yeah. And here's another common thing that happens to players who go for this mech style of play. They will forget to build a lot of extra defense at the back of the base. Now, it almost looks like I'm trying to tease November, right? It almost might look as though I'm seeing the back of the base, and we see, you know, like 10 Void Rays killing everything, and I'm like, don't forget defense. This is what I actually mean. Anytime you are immobile, you can't get to the back of your main to defend very easily. Particular Thors are not fast units. They cannot run away. So, although Mech is very efficient, tanks are beastly units that can do way more damage than they cost in money. Especially if you have like 12 tanks. They're way better. Oh my god, 12 tanks can actually stop like infinity Protoss ground units. It's awesome. However, you can't get to the back of your base to defend. If the tank is sieged, it can't be anywhere else to defend. So you have to do a lot more static defense. You have to do a lot more spotting. Again, all comes back to mobility. Hell, if you're a Protoss player playing a Protoss versus Zerg and you're going a Colossus, Templar, Sentry, Immortal army, like real immobile army, you have to build lots of photon cannons in the back of your base. Lots of photon cannons. If you're a Zerg player who has a huge Broodlord army that he needs to protect, like we're talking like 12 Broodlords, and you have some Roaches and Hydras hanging out underneath it, you have to build some Spine Crawlers at the back of your base. Here, we see all these Void Rays come back, and this is a just perfect example of why you need extra defense. Because look, the Thors get back there, the Thors clean this up, it's easy once the Thors are back. It's easy once the Thors finally drag their slow asses back to the back of your base. Before then, build a lot of turrets. Consider these upgrades at the engineering bay. High-sec auto-tracking increases the range on the turrets. The structure armor upgrades the armor by 2. Consider some of these. So we do see a good amount of Thors popping out. Again, very common thing that happens to players is they get caught in Thor mode. It's very easy to just start making Thors because you just hit a button, they build themselves. Fuck yeah, Thors, you know? Like, you don't have to siege them, you don't have to worry about unsieging. Tanks are a little bit annoying. Invest in more tanks when you go for a mech play. So at this point in time, most Terran players are going to feel horrible. They're going to feel really bad. They're going to be like, ugh, I mean, I have these 4 bases up, but I haven't really moved out of my base. I'm scared to move out of my base. Well, just build a whole bunch of turrets and begin walking your way slowly across the map. And by walking, I mean like sieging tanks, maybe poking across here, sieging up, getting some ravens, maybe to skirt along the edge. Just one raven will be just fine. That sort of thing. We haven't really seen any drops. This is kind of why the Hellion harassment is such an essential part of this. Such an essential part. Is that the Hellions allow you to get somewhere very easily. Let's back up for just a moment and look at the way this thing is feeling. So Terran moves out with a force. Let's describe the what first. Terran is moving out with a mech force, a quote-unquote immobile force, as Sean says. Protoss spots it. Oh my gosh, Protoss is going to encounter this in the middle of the map. Wow, Terran does not really want to encounter anything in the middle of the map because, oh, he's going to have to siege these tanks. Oh, November sieges up the tank. Now watch what happens. I paused it right now because we clearly see that the Protoss is going to get held off. Alright, this tank is way the hell back. If November had, say, 6, 7, 8 tanks in that army, all of them would siege up, the battle would be done, and then you'd have to unsiege and begin inching forward again. If you use Hellion harass, Hellions are not just good at killing probes. They're good at doing something like, you know, you take these Hellions and then you zip your way along down here, and you try to sneak up, and what happens? His whole army ends up being here. Which means that you have the opportunity to siege up here, as opposed to what happens in this battle, which is where you sieged up back there. Hellions help draw your opponent's army away from where you want to be pushing. They help draw your opponent away from where you want to be pushing, allowing you to get in a better siege position. November still doesn't even move this tank up. I'm not trying to say, ooh, that's bad. This is actually very common. You see a lot of extremely top players that it's actually impossible to overcome. After you get in a battle where you're unsieged, or excuse me, where you're sieged up here, if you unsiege and move all the way forward, ugh, right? It's just such a gigantic frickin' pain in the ass. There's all the Void Rays doing all its good damage. And again, this is one of those moments where you can't retreat, right? You can't. Not just because you're surrounded, but because Thors are the slowest units in the game. This is a very easy way to, again, feel like your mech is being a total absolute failure. You gotta be slow with mech, invest a little more money. Siege tanks, lots of turrets, lots of bunkers, lots of slow stranglehold style play. A lot of times, meching players take bases as they expand. As they're expanding, they're just... excuse me. I said that wrong. Yes, that's right. They take bases as they expand. Oh, the profundity with I doth provide. They attack as they expand. On Blistering Sands, this is a particularly common thing to do. As the Terran player is taking his third base, the bottom left Terran player will not take the top left gold. No, no, no. He will take the south expansion because that just is along the way to the opponent. Because it's so immobile, you need to expand along that direction of attack. Expand along that direction of attack. And Mobile forces should be expanding along the direction of the attack. That's why I'm a little leery of these expansions. I mean, hell, if like a Stalker got back here, oh god, these Thors would have to... and then they finally kill it off. It's a real pain. Real freaking pain. So let's go ahead and speed this up. This will end up being the last game that we do, but this is the important one because this is where the mobility was really the significant factor. Again, I'm loving upgrades. I love upgrades when I go mech because I want to be long-term focused. This expansion even looks safe on the map. Oh, Protoss here. I'm going to siege 2 tanks there. See you later, expansion done. Here comes the push again. Hellions are going to be leading out. I do think getting a few extra Thors is wise, because we do see some Void Racer out, but we don't really see that many turrets going down. Turrets could be a great way to reinforce this. Have you ever had like 7 turrets, again, with these great armor upgrades? 2 Thors and all the rest tanks. Gigantic tank play. Huge freaking tank play. Now we're seeing our Terran buddy get a little bit remaxed again. He has a few more tanks moving out. Still don't quite like how few tanks there are. Still don't quite like it. Okay, now see, this is the way a real mech push should feel. This is the really true, honest way that it looks, where you siege up kind of far back. This is very good positioning by November. This is the first very, very well done attack of this game. The other ones have been a little bit haphazardly over-eager. But we see the Hellions moving up here, right? So the Hellions come up here. The army is drawn down. They're drawn away a little bit. The siege tanks are placed in a good location. They're far back. We have the Hellions picking off the good units on the back side. And look at how ridiculously one-sided this is. Look at this. The Terran is way ahead in the food count. He's unsieging his tanks, which I think is a little cocky. Really should keep those sieged. When I say cocky, I mean a little bit like, yeah, you think you're at a bigger advantage than you are. The tanks could have stayed sieged and picked those Stalkers off quite a bit more effectively. But, I mean, we saw these tanks obliterate the ground army. Absolutely obliterate. And again, if we had a whole bunch of turrets there, that would be great. When you're doing this mech play, I also think it's important to note that Vikings are a very much appreciated unit. Vikings and Thors are just excellent in terms of being the mobile half of your seemingly immobile force. There's Seabell with the bleh. He does have quite a bit of money. Akriers. How many probes does he have? He has 86 probes. It's kind of funny to think that his army is only like size 40 as a result. Let's go ahead and speed this up again. You know, again, we're noting that the Hellions and the Thors allow us to be a little more mobile. But for any of you players who want to be a little more Jinro-esque, get a lot of tanks and a lot of turrets and very carefully, slowly, meticulously plan your push and try to win with one push that takes like 10 minutes. We've seen attack after attack after attack after attack. You really never want to lose a huge push. You just want to get pushed back. We see the Zealots moving down, try to pull those Blue Flame Hellions back, but you know what? They're doing a great job regardless. The Siege Tanks in the back are cleaning up these Stalkers. Look at them just get evaporated. The Carriers, unfortunately, are just such kick-ass units that they're hard to deal with. Are more Carriers coming out? Not quite yet. Oh, there we go. And here's the part where the slip begins to occur, when the push is gone. As I've said before, you want to have a push that's kind of slow and ends up moving forward at a very sluggish pace, and then just kind of, you can't stop it. It's the can't-stoppable push. Even maybe favoring doing more harassment and not direct attacking, just to make sure you can continue to expand and this sort of thing. These players have obviously not been like tip-top master-level shape. However, this is still the exact way that mech will feel at all levels. When suddenly your push gets repelled, and your bases don't feel very linked together anymore, this sort of thing happens, where that base was free pickings for Seabell. Completely free pickings. These southern bases, completely free pickings. You need an established tank presence in the middle of the map here that's inching its way forward. So that way all these expansions along the backside are safe. At this point, if Seabell knew about these southern expansions, he would be able to just kill them off. We still see not that many tanks. Yeah, oh, here is the worst crisis to experience as a mech player. This is what a meching player should do way in advance. this sort of thing. Yes, this is great! If you're going Marine Marauder and you're making this many turrets, I'm going to curse at you. But if you are a meching player, if you are an immobile player, and you are doing a lot of this sort of back defense, that is exactly right. Because look, totally defended, and then that way we can have our clustered force work really, really well in the center of the map. Now, the mass Thors look like they're going to end up being a little victory unit for the day. But again, these bottom expansions have been vulnerable for most of the game. For most of the game, they've been quite vulnerable. And again, the Zealots pop out to try to do at least a little bit of damage. They do at least a little bit of damage. And it looks like our Terran player November will end up coming out on the top for the day. So, there's a couple of big things we learned in these 3 games. First of all, make sure that you are focusing on the order of buildings when you're trying to steal a build. Or if you're actually trying to just do your own build. Let the buildings that you're making dictate how you structure your composition. If I have 2 factories with reactors and 2 factories with tech lab, I'll make some tanks, but mainly a whole bunch of Hellions. Right? Seems good. In this last game, we saw a lot of how mobility works. That with your attacks, if you're used to Marine Maraudering attacks, you're going to be used to just sprinting up to his ramp and just blast him away, taking stim. Oh, yeah, love stim upgrades. You've been doing that like crazy. Don't do that with mech. Don't do that with more immobile plays. More things that are a little more muscular. You want to play it a little more carefully because you have to choose where you fight because you can't retreat with a slower, more immobile force. We also saw that expand-wise, you can't take those bottom left expansions and hope to be safe. They were safe because Protoss just didn't check them, but the instant the Protoss did check them, they were very, very vulnerable. Very, very, very vulnerable. And last but not least, make a lot of static defense. A lot of turrets when you're doing an immobile power play, because you just kind of need to. There's no good way to get back, because again, you are immobile. Immobile. Let's see here. That GUI, it wasn't really a question, but it's an excellent thing to highlight. He says, Mech is super cost effective, and you don't lose very much of it, unlike bio units that you basically sacrifice to take out tossed units. Here's a good way to think about it. Mobile players can move around the map freely. Wherever they want, they can just walk there. And then if it's wrong, they can walk right back. So the mobile players can take more expansions. And as a result, they can afford to just throw money at the opponent. You have 15 siege tanks? Well, that's fine. I have 8 bases and 30 barracks making marauders. I will stim, lose everything to those tanks, but I have another whole army. Stim again, lose everything to those tanks. Get another army. Stim again, attack, kill off everything you have with way more stuff in a way more cost-inefficient fashion. With this cost-effective army, you don't have the luxury of a lot of bases. So, again, you can't even bounce between your bases very much. That is why that static defense is so important. So important. Let's see here. Parasite01, I'm still not going to take your questions because they're so good. And you always ask them. I want to do different ones. Yes, let's see here. So, CH368 says, Hey Day 9, without Goliath, Protoss Air is particularly hard to combat with a mech army. How can I effectively go about investing in Marines Vikings without hurting the strength of my mech army? So, an interesting thing to note is that Vikings are actually great units to get. Like, you can do like a tank, a Hellion, Viking mix, and you're great. You only even need like 1 starport with a reactor, and you're in good shape. I would note that this kind of, if you think about it, Vikings help with the immobility a bit, because you can poke around and scout and sort of zone things together, because really you just want them to confront your tanks. If you're making a lot of tanks and or Thors along with Vikings, you'll notice you have some mineral excess. There's nothing wrong with just getting more Hellions. Nothing wrong. Sure, they direct counter the Zealot, but for the record, Hellions are amazing against Stalkers, because Hellions have quite a bit of life, and the Stalkers shoot kind of slow, and the Hellions are doing some damage. So really, the Hellions are great to just throw in the front, as the Stalkers do minimum amounts of damage as your tanks rip everything up. Very, very, very good stuff. Very good stuff. let's see. Um, Oh, here's a great question by David Hill 76 who says, "Dear Day 9, during the game with Ryu Chus, I tried a similar build to that. Siege tanks, fewer Marines than usual. However, I lost because I didn't harass as well. How important do you think it is to harass? How should I practice at getting better harassment techniques?" So, the first thing that I would recommend to everyone who is playing Mech is to just poke with your Hellions seemingly constantly. Not get into the back of the base and try to kill off all the probes. That's the biggest mistake I see with Hellions, is people trying to suicide the Hellions to kill things off. Don't suicide. 5 Hellions is pretty good. That's kind of a lot of money. 500. That's more than it costs to make an expansion command center. But if you can poke and you see units, pull back. If you poke and you see a vulnerability, go in there and exploit it, and then pull out as you can. Do that sort of thing. Do that a lot. That is probably the biggest thing that I would say is the best harassment technique. Just have your Hellions as control 1. Everything else at your base is hotkeyed. Build. Hellions is control 1, moving around the map constantly. It's what makes Mech very, very fun to play, to be honest. What I would also note is that with Mech, you want to have a time that you attack. Generally, around the time you're taking your third, as you're sort of pushing towards them, is a good time to attack. If on Metalopolis, if Ryu, who was at the top against his left opponent, inched down and took the gold as he pushed, that would be a fantastic time to do that. Just make sure it's a little bit slower, a little bit more methodical. Make sure you do a lot of late-term oriented things. Be getting a lot of upgrades. Be getting a lot of unit-producing structures. Be getting a lot of SCVs. So that is the sort of big thing that I would note. Because honestly, if you are doing some okay Hellion harass, like maybe kill off 10 probes, but mainly just keep his army back, you're going to be in great shape once your big power push ends up happening. Just make sure you don't have your siege tanks sieged up in one big clump at the last second. You want to be leapfrogging them forward at a pretty good pace. Let's see. Let's go ahead and take one more question. Let's just go ahead and take one more question. Oh, Eternity 1. I love this. Danon, what are your thoughts on rally points when engaging the slow push? Should you rally to the front or should you rally to your natural so that you can better defend against harassment? I'm assuming this question is if we have our slow push, we have our tanks and Hellions go into our natural. I really think that everything should be dedicated to the front lines. What makes a Mech play strong is that it's almost impenetrable. And it's a very literally spatially long. It takes up a lot of room on the screen. So it ends up being, little tiny swing arounds. Like with the Marine Marauder Ball, if you're like running up to the center, some Zerglings can sneak around back, but not really the case with that sort of Mech play. There are oftentimes rally points that you'll kind of want, like something that you could pull back if you kind of desperately needed to, but it's still kind of far forward. But again, you do want to have a lot of your stuff committed to the front because Mech is a sort of slow, blobby way to play. So you want to just keep expanding the blob, just sort of keep pushing it in. It's not so much like the Marines and Marauders where you can't really afford to have 6 Marines wandering in the middle of the map because if they get picked off, you're screwed. You'll be having such a huge force that he will need to deal with it and need to sort of directly be nervous. Haha. So that's going to wrap up this daily. I am going to be done for now. Definitely, again, go to Kingston's Facebook page, facebook.com/HyperX community, and submit those fancy, good unit impersonations. Also, do go to shortyawards.com and vote for me. Yeah, I'm catching up. I was 1,500 votes behind the first place guy, but now I'm only like 400. Yeah, so go to Shorty Awards and vote. For next week's Newbie Tuesday, I'm actually not going to be taking replay submissions. I'm going to be doing a special topic. We're going to do a little play and lecture then. For next week's Fun Day Monday, it's going to be basically you having me do improv casting. You basically submit things that I must say or a way that I must talk. For instance, you could say something like, Day 9 must switch the letters B and F in his casting. And then what I'll do during that Fun Day Monday episode is just cast some arbitrary games, and every 5 minutes I'll take a new constraint from my admins. So it might be something like say your sentences backwards, it might be something like that, and for 5 minutes I'll have to say my sentences backwards. Just want to do something a little more fun, put the burden on me instead of on any of y'all. So that's going to wrap up the daily. Thanks so much for tuning in. I am sleepy. I'm actually going to go to bed right now. It is 9:26. Yes. Good night, guys. Good night. Bye.